Pretend you're training somebody and you're just training them in isolation. No one else is going to give you any feedback as to whether or not you're doing a good job, as to whether or not your program's working. All you have is you and the athlete. Well, what you're going to do in that situation is you're going to do everything you possibly can to try and accumulate as much evidence and support for the methods you're utilizing. You wouldn't rely on any external opinions, any external beliefs. You would just try and understand the evidence of methods, or I guess evidence surrounding certain methods, and whether or not they can be supported in your training process. And it would be very much a discovery process because you don't know what's going on, or you do know what's going on, but you don't know what's absolutely best. And so you're always trying to just be better. Now imagine a world where we have that same exact situation, but instead of just focusing on you and the athlete, you can share something, and as many as 1,000,000 people can see that and reinforce what you're doing is beneficial, or they can tell you what you're doing is wrong, or whatever else in between. They now have commentary, and you can go and you can consume some of that commentary based on your own posts of videos and information, or based on other people's posts and information. And what begins to happen is we start to have this justification based on confirmation, not only confirmation, but justification of methods based on someone giving us congratulatory support, or any sort of, I almost call it justification based on gratification, because there is some gratification for someone liking what you're doing. And it almost reinforces a feedback loop that you're going to continue to do this and post those things. And if you post those things and you do those things and people like them, then someone else who sees those things might do those things and post those things and like them. And what happens is we start to have a bunch of these really small, acute events, you posting on social media and me posting on social media. And if you post something that I like, then I might comment and agree that I like it. And if I post something that you like, and you might comment, agree, and like it. And we have an emergent pattern which begins to take place. And what happens is we have information that's propagated and promoted, not based on any of its evidence or support, but simply based on how many times we're seeing it. It's almost like when you sell someone something, the more times they see that something, the more likely they are to buy that something. It's something like 7 contacts is what they say before someone purchases something. But if they see it 7, 8, 9, 10 times, it's not just 7 contacts, it's more than that, but they're also seeing it from numerous different sources. I should say 7, 8, 9, 10 different people posting that than just one person repeatedly posting that. And so what begins to happen, it's almost like there's more influence to post that, and it becomes cyclic in nature. But eventually we hit some sort of critical mass where that exercise routine or that method or that fad or whatever it is gets to a point where so many people have liked it that doing something different draws the eyes of attention, and that will begin to be unique. And then think of almost like a bucket of water. A hole is poked in that bucket of water and begins to spill into this other bucket, and eventually becomes full, and this whole process begins to repeat itself. Now, what happens is I think a lot of people witness these, what we call emergent patterns, these everyone drifting towards one side or the other. And typically people drift on 2 sides because it's easier if, a lot of times as humans, we like to have people tell us we're doing something really good. It's a good feeling to have that gratification. It's a good feeling to feel like you're part of a community. It's a good feeling to have support of others. I think naturally there's some aspect of human nature that is kind of lonely, and we have some aspect of connection that we want to, reach out to. But in the previous world, before social media, you were just, relegated to your town and whatever direct connections were around you. So you might not be exposed to a huge variety of fads. And that's kind of why you could argue that the music culture, if you go back 25 years ago, that there's much more specific genres of music within specific areas, because the consumption of general information wasn't really a thing. It was just kind of quasi-general, what you could get on the news or the paper. But then there's much more direct contact, what is happening in your area. And that, ironically, is very similar to what happens in strength conditioning, and you see certain fads or methods pop up across different realms. But what I'm saying now is because everything's kind of more global and we're all interconnected, that you typically have a division become created, because if you have two dividing parties, if everyone was just on the same team, then kind of like no one's on the same team because everyone's just supporting each other. But then how do you know someone's doing good or not so good? It's almost like you need some sort of a rival to go up against. And this is really commonplace that we see on social media. Things become slightly divisive, and it will begin to trickle into your training methods. I know this is talk about weightlifting for some reason, but it also has some implications beyond that. But you see things like, oh, we only back squat, or we only Olympic lift, and we only do these methods, and that group of individuals becomes somewhat combative or divisive with another group of individuals, and then that cohort becomes a group that supports one another, and they feel some community around combating this method or whatever. But it's nothing about actually you and the athlete making progress. And so what happens, we have what's called these emergent patterns, and these emergent patterns begin to take place, and you see a huge popularized method here, and a popularized method here, and a popularized method here, and they become extremely identity driven. Essentially, you or that individual might associate part of themselves with that method. And we've gotten so far removed from actually training someone and trying to make someone better, and so much closer removed to some sort of a community where we have individuals who support each other. But then, like any community or a group of individuals, we can have maybe rivals within different communities that we go up against. And this is really common as a young strength coach, because you're almost brought into this strength and conditioning world, or probably whatever profession you're in, based on whomever your mentor or mentors were. And a lot of times those mentors or the mentor themselves might be an individual who was taught by other individuals and is kind of within a certain family tree or branch of within the community. So you get exposed to a lot of those, and it gets reinforced. But that happens basically because we have this weird network effect of so many different people allowed to connect and communicate with so many different people, which is amazing positive benefits. But within it, there becomes these other kind of small micro outcomes where lots of people are acting in a certain direction that lead to these macro aggregated effects that we then say, oh, well, for some reason there's this huge group of people who like to do this type of training method, and we don't agree with that, and we rather do this training method. But no one's actually talking about the science, the evidence, or support. They're just too busy putting someone else down or maybe supporting themselves. And it's never centrated around the athlete and making them better, but more about that own person and their own means and how they look amongst their peers' eyes, right? It's funny because we train people and we don't have like a bunch of athletes being like, oh, I really support that person, they do a great job. It's just a bunch of other peers and individuals within your cohort saying, oh, yeah, I like that person or I don't like that person. It's not really debated in the traditional sense, but I don't call it more argumentative would possibly be the better word to use. And the reason why I bring this up, and we'll wrap it up here, is that when we go into selecting specific methods and training and all this fun stuff to better the athlete, I really encourage people to try and tackle it from the very first example, where it's just you, the athlete, and almost in this imaginary realm, it's all on you to make them better. And that is going to take place over a time course that is much longer than instant gratification allows for. You're not going to be able to make one post and someone tells you to do a good job. You might have to wait 7 months to a year and you realize you did a good job or not so good job. And then along the way, you continue to try and reinforce your support and evidence for what you're doing, or maybe try and challenge it so you can refine it and critically think about it. And through that method, almost like as someone who is shaping metal, you're constantly maybe making a sword. I'm not a swordsman, I don't know. I'd imagine you constantly cool and heat the steel repeatedly, trying to make it stronger and stronger. In the same way, we're constantly stressing and challenging our methods, and this can be used for any sort of belief system or whatever educational system you have, instead of just being stuck and caught in one specific way and becoming dogmatic about it and making it part of your identity. And then using other individuals amongst the echo chamber to reinforce those pathways, we try and challenge ourselves to be a little more have a refined, supported method. So that's just my take on that. I hope that makes sense. I made it related to strength conditioning, but I think it impacts many different aspects and features of life itself. So I appreciate you guys listening. I hope you enjoy. As always, take care.